Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My guest today is an old friend of the show, Chris Schultz, also known as the 6mm Mandalorian. Chris is one of the organizers of Galactic Civil War, an immersive milsim / LARP set in a galaxy far, far away that utilizes airsoft for combat mechanics. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you likely will have heard Chris or our friend Matt, the Storm Wizard, talking about these events. Well, it's 2024 now, and that means a new season of Galactic Civil War events is upon us, starting with Fate's Grasp, which is being held at Action Sports Wisconsin on Star Wars weekend, May the 4th and the 5th, 2024. So, Chris, thanks for being here, man.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you getting dressed up for the occasion. That's awesome.
What do you mean dressed up?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. So listen, why don't we start off by talking a little bit about the year that was? So what have you been up to lately, and how did 2023 really shake out for Galactic Civil War overall?
Yeah, so beginning of 2023, May, we started off with our first event of the year, which was Ambition's Toll. And that was a continuous event. It was a 30-some hour continual event that we did at Action Sports Wisconsin last year. And that was really our first dive at a full continuous event. We had done an event earlier in 2022 that was set in Bolivar down in Missouri. And that event we had to take a break because the field is just a giant quarry. So at night play, you have to really limit the AO where people can play, just for safety, because you could take,
Right.
30, 40-foot clips and you wouldn't see those players again.
Yeah.
So we kind of went through last year. We had our two different events. Both of them were still very LARPy, still very open world experiences. And then we realized that we needed to kind of pivot slightly in how we're doing some of the events, because some AOs that we look at and some AOs that we want to go to won't really suit a continual open play style game, continual LARP style event. So that's when we started looking at different options and different style events to do, and that's where we settled on the Battlefront series. So the Battlefront series, our first event that we did there was just back in November, and that was a 2-day event, but it was really focused on combat. It was really focused on the live action portion of our event series. So if you look at LARPs in general, you have your live action role play is what it stands for. And we really wanted to capitalize the L and the A for the Battlefront series, the live action portion of the event. We wanted a series that could take players, they can get them used to our rule set, but establish it in a way that allowed players to take a more gradual step into the event, because there are a lot of different rules when you deal with LARPs, and there are a lot of different facets that go into place there. And if players are not accustomed or not acclimated for that kind of game, they can either burn themselves out really quick, or they don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know they're supposed to be in character when they're talking to people. And that can really be a drawback for some players. So we wanted an event series that was that step in to our world, because our world is up here and it's really crazy and it's really dynamic and it's really cool. But if you're just looking to sling BBs and Star Wars armor, that's where the Battlefront series really takes in effect, because it takes your hand and it runs you through all of the combat mechanics right away, and you just focus on that aspect. And then once you get comfortable with that aspect of the gameplay, that's where you want to start looking at coming to the bigger LARP series events that we do. And really, we're going to focus on doing one of those a year, and then having the Battlefront fall in different places. And especially, it gives us a chance to explore different AOs that we wouldn't be we're either new to, or the relationship is still new between us and the field owners. So it really gets those entry players in, puts them into the different Rebel or Imperial or the unaffiliated team, and it allows them to step into the world. And
Mm-hmm.
along that line, we also jumped in and partnered with Skirmish, which is a capture system that exists. It's a mesh system that gets set up on the field. So we had over 20 different control points that were all linked together through the Skirmish system. So you could pull out your phone and you could look in real time who owns what capture point and who owns what respawns on the field, and then you could go attack those capture points. Every single player got a skirmish chip along with their chain code card. So their skirmish chip was attached to the chain code card, and they're able to interact with those different points. So we could tell who is doing what and where on the field. Gives you a recap too as an admin as what happened, what's going on,
Yeah.
how many points did people earn, and it was so good for admin purposes because we could push a button and then the players took care of everything else. It was so good for the admin portion of the game because you just allowed the system to do its thing and players interacted with it. And at the end, we had the recap of, okay, who won that round? Easy. Let's pull it up. Okay, Imperials won that round. Next round. Who won that one? The Rebels. And then you could give rewards out for the players who won those rounds.
Yeah, I was reading up the reading familiarizing myself with your updated rule set, let's call it. And
Yeah,
one of the things I noticed is because of the skirmish system too, you can do stuff like have different classes be able to capture certain points faster than others, giving them an advantage in certain situations. If that's what if you need or whatever, which again adds a lot of complexity to the game, which if you're a brand new player, that's a lot to get used to in, one weekend. I can totally see a scenario where as a new player, you go to this event for the first time and maybe you don't get accustomed to the feel and the groove of it until it's basically over, right?
yeah,
So I can totally see the benefit of saying, okay, well, let's get them to learn one part of it, and then when they come to the actual LARP event, then they know one part. They don't have to worry about that. They can focus on really sinking their teeth into the other part, which, to be honest, I mean, is the not the best part, but it's certainly the most unique part because airsoft combat is airsoft combat. I mean, you can dress it up with blasters and stuff, and that's all fine. But what's really unique about the events that you're doing, in addition to just bringing everything together, it's this universe that you've created of storyline. And so it's a really neat lead into my next question, which is where did you leave off the year from a storyline standpoint, and how does that tie into Fate's Grasp? Like, what is the story at this point?
yeah. So if you look at our event series, we really do the LARP story. So the big show we like to call it. That's the continual event. So the last one we did was at Boston, Wisconsin, in action sports, right? Um, and we're going back there again for I guess you could say the continual story of Mauston 3. So as far as our overarching story, we were at Bolivar down in Bolivar, Missouri, and that was a mining planet. So it was all focused on collecting coaxium and refining it, and rebels trying to disrupt that, and then you had all these smugglers and everything else in between, and Mandalorians kind of protecting the village. Um, and then that was all well and good, and Rebels pulled off a good victory down there in Bolivar, which led over to Fate's Grasp, where we had a heavy campaign to bring in more Imperial players because the Imperials were definitely outgunned down in Bolivar. So we increased credit incentives for enlisting with the Imperials, which gave us about a 4-to-1 ratio of Imperials to Rebels at at the next event that we did. So when we're looking at Ambition's Toll, which is really kind of fitting the name that we gave it before it even rolled out, was the ambition of the rebels in the first event took its toll on them during Ambition's Toll. So it was very much the vibe of like Empire Strikes Back, where the rebels, had a really big victory in the first event, and then the second event, the Imperials really were domineering on the map, and the way we came up with the story there was it was primarily focused on research and development of the Dark Troopers, which was our kind of surprise reveal for that event, which was two electronic juggernaut suits that essentially, the Imperials were doing research to upgrade. So instead of just, dropping a juggernaut on the field and then it just doing its thing and killing everybody in sight and that was a rebel, the Imperials really had to dump a lot of resources into completing research missions for this juggernaut. And so they're developing like the armor on it so it could gain more armor and become harder to kill. They were developing its weapon systems and its targeting so it is able to, use better blasters and use better weapons against opponents. And even in the beginning, like it could only do things that Imperial officers were instructing it. So it was still restricted in a way instead of, just having a guy wandering around blasting everyone because, as a human being, like, yeah, I could do this. I could just kill everybody right now. But the main part of our series is we want things that are fun for everyone opposed to just fun for one person. So when we roll out like Juggernaut suits or the HK Juggernaut or, the Cad Bane or Bosk that made an appearance at Milestone 3, they all have specific roles and specific duties that they're supposed to be doing, and they all have restrictions in place on them. Whether the Dark Troopers, who had to have an Imperial officer commanding them and telling them how they're supposed to engage, or, are they supposed to be doing a patrol path? I need you to move 400 feet forward along this path, and they're really spoon feeding this droid as it's starting to learn and evolve, and really the whole system itself with the Dark Troopers is it was a hybrid system. So there was actually a human inside of it, but we kind of go back into the days of like the Clone Wars where they had inhibitor chips plugged into all these clones, and that's very much what was happening with the Dark Trooper suit. Is the Empire wants these powerful units, but they want to have complete control of them. So there was that kind of restraining bolt on these Dark Troopers. They hadn't unlocked their full potential. So that was the Imperial goal the whole time, was go to different areas on the field to upgrade with different scientists and different weapon specialists or armor makers or things like that allowed them to increase the potential of these Dark Troopers. So even though the Empire had all these forces and all these different units at its disposal, and 4-1 seems really big, but when you look at it on a scale of you have to start diverting your resources around the map to do all these different things at the same time, then you have to have the rebels doing their part of, okay, how can we derail this situation, whether it is like capturing the director of the Dark Trooper program and getting him off planet to really put a halt in their production. So that's kind of where we landed with last year's May event. And then going into this year, in game, we're looking at about a 3-month time jump. So about 3 months has gone by since the last LARP event. And the Battlefront series, like, you stay in character, you can go as your character, you can earn upgrades, but really it's out of that like continuity, it's out of the canon kind of portion of the storytelling. We'll still do story-driven missions and story-driven quests at these Battlefront missions, but they're really not tied into the complete story of the Galactic Civil War.
Right.
So as far as we're looking at this year, the Empire had really been successful, but they weren't in charge of the town of Vess, which was the main city in Action Sports, Wisconsin. They had their Imperial outpost, their Imperial embassy, but they weren't in control of the center of the map. It was still, they were just really focused on owning that research program. So they were kind of off to the side doing their own thing. This next year, they are in control of Vess. They've had enough with Mandalorians who are supposed to be kind of peacekeepers in the town, who had really joined forces with the rebels at the last event. So my clan Vorpan, was the one that was ultimately responsible for the protection of the citizens of Vess. They did a lot of shady things against the Empire at the event, and really it's led to the Mandalorian, there was the convert that was in town that had our Mandalorian base in it, was essentially driven out of town. So the Mandalorians are pushed aside this next event, and they're very very they're not to the point where you see them in the Mandalorian where they're completely pushed off to the side, but at the same time, like, it's very much that restriction on them. There might be a deal where only two Mandalorians can be together at a time in town, or things to really put restrictions on these Mandalorians that had done a lot of harm against the Empire at the last event. So you're seeing repercussions of the actions of the group that the group took against one faction or the other, and you're seeing that roll over to the next event. And that's really what we want to do, is we want players' actions, players' choices, story-driven, branches that can take you one way or the other that will really decide what the story is for the next event and how things start off, main missions that happen and main missions that roll out because of interactions with NPCs that you had, and just the growth of that lore around the series.
Right. And I'm curious when it comes to, because you mentioned, for example, the Death Troopers at Ambition's Toll, and now, the change of the Mandalorians. And I know that for Mandalorians, for example, because I know Matt was a player and he just showed up as a Mandalorian at the very, very first event. But when you have specific roles like that are important to the story, are those also players, or are they staff members or team members that you actually get on board to do those things from a logistics standpoint?
Yeah, so if you're looking at, like, we'll talk about the Dark Trooper program first. The volunteers that were in there, those were essentially players that had volunteered to do a specific role at the event. If you're looking at what's going to happen next event, you're going to see a lot of Imperial players given the opportunity to go into the Dark Trooper suits and go on patrols and do certain things with those Dark Trooper suits, since they had unlocked so many things with them.
Mhm.
When you're looking at, like, Mandalorians, at this point in the game, we've changed how some of the factions are, and that's going to be a really big part of the next event. Is we want to open up more choices to players, and we want to have more quest lines to get players involved with different factions. But at the same time, we want there to be repercussions for actions that you take, especially if you're trying to play, like, both sides of the map or both sides of the field, in terms of what alliances you're trying to make and what the groups you're trying to be a part of. So we're going to have some very steep deviations in some of these groups that are starting to appear. And really, we like to have, like, a NPC who is in charge of a group, but that's more so that we have someone there that is giving out quest rewards, that is helping with progression of characters and progression of story with some of these people. But there's going to be other players that come to the game, and they're going to do their own little squad, and they're going to do their own little thing, and they're going to want to be part of the unaffiliated, which is what we rolled out at Battlefront Boulevard, but it wasn't, it's not fleshed out like it is for the full LARP event. So when
Mhm.
you're looking at signing up for the event, you have three options. You can join in as an Imperial, you can join in as a Rebel, or you can join in as an unaffiliated player. So that gives you three different options. So the Rebels, the Imperials, you can kind of wrap your mindset around that. Those are your more milsim experiences. A lot of those are driven towards the two different armies that exist during the Galactic Civil War. The Empire is always going to hate a Rebel, and a Rebel is always going to hate an Imperial. But the middle ground there is you have Imperials that have to be in certain uniform requirements and Rebels that have to be in certain uniform requirements. And the two armies that exist are going to have very different missions going on at the exact same time. It's not going to be as simple as, hey, here are the 6 different areas that need to be captured. Go capture those and hold those areas. Each faction has their very specific missions that they'll have, whether it's like patrol missions for the Empire, or the Rebels will have to do certain, they might have to loot things or go take down relay stations or things like that. That, if Imperials and Rebels cross paths while they're on the field, yes, there's going to be BBs slung at each other, but really it's not as simple as, okay, everyone's fighting over one point on the map right now, go do it. So the second part of that is the Imperials have will still have more credit incentives than essentially the rebels will, and there'll be those control points that I kind of talked about on the map. They will exist, but it's not something that the rebels necessarily need to take out all the time. But the Imperials might be rewarded with more credits the more of these control points that they own across the map at the time. So as they get called in for their mandatory formations, the Imperials might get a 2-time credit payout because we're doing a good job spreading the word of the Empire and holding territories and keeping things under control, so everyone gets a bonus. And you know, Lord Vader is very happy with your performance. 2 thumbs
Right.
up, good job. Uh, so so you have that dynamic there, and then we're kind of looking at the rebels, which actually, as we're still lining out the different kind of bonuses, the Imperials can have the additional credit bonus, and that's really their defining factor is more credits. You're part of the Empire. The credits never stop. Come join the fun. And then you have the Rebel Alliance, which is going to be a lot more sneaky, doing things behind kind closed doors, setting up ambushes, but at the same time, they're kill on sight if they're in their rebel uniforms. But
Hmm.
rebels will also have the ability to use disguises as long as they're fighting their rules of engagement. Where if they're in disguise, they cannot attack anybody else, but they can still put on and cover their normal rebel marine uniform with ponchos and take off their rebel cap and put on a different cap because that's the kind of vibe that we want the rebels to have. Is they need to kind of blend in. They need to know that they are basically killed on sight if any rebel or imperial comes across them because they're traitors to the empire. And then you
So
have the third. Go ahead.
yeah, well, I'm just curious about that dynamic. And because I would expect that there's a certain level of suspension of disbelief that's required from the players because it kind of reminds me of a conversation I was having with Jordan about a game that they were doing in Vermont where they could hide, and like if the other team saw them really trying to hide, they would just pretend that they didn't see them, right? So in a similar way, I can totally expect if I'm an Imperial player and I'm signed up for this event and I go to this event and I see this other guy and he's got like a hood over his head or whatever, I'm like, this guy's a rebel, right? He's just hiding. And so am I as a player, my sort of reaction to be like, oh no, I should pretend like he is not actually a rebel or that I don't know that because he's actually trying to hide it. Like, is that sort of the dynamic you're going for?
Yeah, it's partial that, but we've kind of taken it a step further. We have our chain code cards, right? So this is kind of a look at a chain code card. We'll see how it comes up on camera here.
Hmm.
But as you're looking at this card, you can't really see it too well on camera. But this is where somebody's upgrades, the perks that they've unlocked, what class they are, that's all linked on their chain code card. But they also have a unique number affiliated with their chain code card that allows us, that allows the us to register to keep track of their upgrades after they turn it in. But the
Hmm.
Imperials will also have a listing on their Imperial base of every single player that exists on the field in their chain code and their affiliation back at headquarters. So one of our parts of the game, right, is there might be Imperials going on patrols, just spot checking people's chain codes, spot checking people's identification, and they'll be able to radio into command and essentially call in and say, "Hey, all right, I've got to run a chain code card, chain code 46161 62216," and then it'll flag back as we may need to bring that person in for questioning. So then that initiates a whole, okay, we might have a rebel player here, bring them in for questioning, and then you'll go through the whole role playing. Why are you here? Why are you on Moston 3? And then, so it really takes that level of, suspending disbelief, but also there's a system in play that is deeper than just, okay, that guy is a rebel or that guy isn't a rebel, right?
Hmm.
Some of the other parts that go into it is, okay, weapons. What weapons can you openly carry in the town of Vest? and that is a big indicator on whether or not someone is, a military insurgent at that time. Because if you see a giant sniper rifle hanging out a window from just a random civilian, that's a no-go in town. So you have, the stormtroopers or the scout troopers that are on patrol start seeing that, and they're going to immediately act against that, because that is against, normal procedure in a town to just have sniper rifles hanging out of windows, So,
Yeah,
so they're going
whether
to
that's Star
investigate
Wars,
those
whether that's
situations.
Star Wars or real world, I'm pretty sure it
Yeah,
is no go.
it's a little shady right there. So that's a big jump here. Is we're going all in on the LARP aspect of the event, and having that interaction between rebels and Imperials, and rebels are going to try to like set up their safe houses in town, and then start getting hold of different like people that can smuggle, because smuggling is part of the game where you can conceal items. So if you are a we call them operatives slash scoundrels. So that is one class. But one of the things they can do is they can conceal items. So any item that is concealed cannot be unconcealed unless you're dealing with someone who is also an operative or a smuggler. So if you think of like an ISB agent for the Imperials doing searches on things, he's going to be able to find out more things about somebody or what they're carrying if if he is if he is that operative class, because he has the ability to actually loot and look at what you're carrying and ask you about what you're carrying and reveal what you're carrying, versus a smuggler who's just, a scoundrel who's making his way through town, and he's got maybe a loot of guns, like rebel players big blasters that they're taking into town to set up this ambush. Um,
Hmm.
Working in with another smuggler to get that into town and get around Imperial detection so they can set up those ambushes. And that's the big component of building this event. Is there's so many things that we can do in airsoft in these games that we just kind of play it as we're just going to keep flinging BBs at each other and just go 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 go. But if you set up different layers of operation to these events, you can set up some really great scenarios. And then it could be about you spending 1/3 of the day setting up this ambush by working all of your crew's gear into a certain area of the town, because patrol is going to be coming by at a certain time later in the day, and you've set up for this ambush to take down this group or this dark trooper, or an Imperial official of some sort for questioning. And that's the kind of stories we want to keep building. We want it to keep building on more than just good gunfighting experiences, which is good, and that's why we've really settled on a really fun gunfighting scenario and gunfighting rule set for our game, and that allows us to build everything on top of this.
So that's really interesting, and obviously, like in an event like this, and I would say in a lot of airsoft events, there is an absolute need and sort of desire to foster like emergent gameplay. You want players to create their own situations, like you were just describing, the idea of like them scanning your code and then taking you in for questioning, and then you having to figure out a lie or an alibi or a cover story, or whatever it is. And if you haven't thought about it and you're a rebel, you might be like in a bad way, sort of shit out of luck, right? Trying to come up with something on the fly that's not believable, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. But the flip of that is something I'm interested in getting your take on. Like, how do you make sure that the emergent gameplay that is occurring within the spirit of the rules? And the example that I was thinking about was with the Camtonos. So I was looking at the rules for the Camtonos, and it says there are 4 things that you can do if you find a Camtono, right? You can open it if you have the code. You can get an operative to slice it with their cipher if you are an operative or you have one on your squad. You can bring it back to someone and they'll just pay you like 100 credits or whatever for the Camtono. Thanks for your service, whatever. Or you can leave it, right? And in my mind, I was thinking like, wouldn't it be cool instead if I know where it is, if I take steps to move it and hide it somewhere else? Now, I'm the only one who knows where that goes, but that's not specifically in the rule set. And as an admin, you might be like, oh, hang on, no, that's not what we intended with that, right? How do
Yeah.
you deal, or how have you dealt with situations like that in the past, or have they come up?
Yeah. So really, the big thing with that is um, we've never misplaced a Camtono in the three events that have gone on. They've either made it back to where they're supposed to go, or, and that's the big thing is if you're going to stash someplace, which is it's specifically outlined in the rules, is you have to do all of those things. Either have it with you until you take it back somewhere, or you leave it where it's sitting. Those are
Hmm.
the basically when you run down that rule set. So like the stashing of a lootable item is not something that you're able to do within the game set rules. And that's
Hmm.
one of the things is we have all of our written rules, but then we'll also go through and we'll elaborate on some more at the specific, missing our game briefing at the beginning of the game. But yeah, that's one of the things of that rule set is you're not supposed to stash a Camtona somewhere else where no one else is going to find it. There are ways that those Camtonos get onto the field, so a lot of those missions involving Camtonos are around the kind of criminal underworld that exists. So they're either going to be they need to take a Camtono and do a dead drop somewhere, and then a different group is supposed to go recover that Camtono from that area based on the information that you've given. And one group's move is to get it there and get back and have the photo evidence of that plant of that Camtono in that area, and then you pass along that photo to the next group and be like, go recover this. And if it's not there, they fail their mission, they fail their quest, and they just have to
Hmm.
return empty-handed. And the next series onto to the whole thing of it is, yeah, there's a lot of facets that exist to the game, and sometimes you're not going to find the answer to the question you have in terms of what mission you're on or who you're looking for or what happens. And there may be some dead ends you run into on the game because there might be a certain NPC that has been captured by the Imperial forces that you're supposed to get, you're supposed to recruit their help to help find something or help look for something. But that's the whole sandbox experience is not everything is going to go to plan. Not everything is
Hmm.
going to be where it's supposed to be, and not everything is always going to happen like the game makers kind of foresee it happening, and that's fine. The biggest thing that we have to do as game makers is we have to all of our leaders of our factions are all admins to the game, and that's kind of a direction that we wanted to go with instead of having that like player led experience, because we wanted some sort of omnipresent knowledge to be shared between all of us to make things happen. If something isn't happening or something isn't going a direction that not necessarily we wanted to, but we want the players to experience, we can help nudge them in that direction all together. Whether it is setting up like dynamic conflicts between rebels and Imperials at certain points, or just helping unravel certain things like where is a certain NPC right now? And then you can, oh, the Imperials have him right now. They'll be like, okay, can we get him moving, or can we get him on an escort mission, or can we get him on a or try to get him on a transport off world, where you can set up that interaction to have the rebels have one more chance at getting this person, or the Mandalorians have one more chance at getting this target before he's completely out of play for the rest of the game. And that's really what we're going for is you don't want all these like near misses in story, but when you go on our
Yeah.
Discord and you go on our Discord and you look, because we have one section that is it's titled from a certain point of view, and it is literally just people telling stories of their character, how it played out for them. And it's
Hmm.
really cool to see multiple stories being told of the same interaction or the same kind of story arc that we put out, being told by the players, and from a rebel perspective, from an imperial perspective, from a Mandalorian or like a Clan Vorpan perspective or an outlaw perspective, and how all these pieces were fitting together at the same time. And even if all those pieces didn't exactly line up in everyone's mind in terms of what exactly happened with the scenario with this NPC, everyone has their own version of it, and that's really part of what Star Wars has always been is, what is the story from a certain point of view, you know the Jedi are evil for from a certain point of view. What I told you wasn't a lie, as Obi-Wan kind of alluded to when he was talking about Anakin and his father. So the really fun thing is, like I said, is the story that is laid out may not be the exact story that us as story makers want, or like Raincloud, who is our officially like our main lore master, and he's pulling all these threads and like setting up all these webs, and the biggest thing with that is we have to be kind of aware of everything that's going on, but at the same time we have to be flexible as game coordinators to like, okay, let's start steering it this way. Like everything's kind of turned a direction, and let's lean into this more because we had no idea this was even going to happen. So let's push more resources into this part of the story and push something else away because everyone's really having fun with this kind of aspect that's happening right now, or this kind of story that's being told, and everyone's kind of diving in and all at once.
And it's interesting as you describe this too, because it seems to me that despite the fact that the rule set is quite complicated and there's a lot to it, and yeah, you could miss some things or whatever, the players are obviously very bought into what they're going to like I can't imagine someone sort of a half-ass going into this kind of event like, yeah, maybe I'll go, maybe I'll not. It seems like the kind of thing that you'll get your ticket and you'll be super hyped to go, and as a direct consequence of that, you probably have a very high level of compliance when it comes to adhering to the game rules and player, like, good sportsmanships and stuff like that, because to your point, I think at the very beginning, everyone is trying to make sure everyone has a good time, right? It's not just about me, but I see this other person or this awesome like cosplay or whatever that they want to have for their character. You're going to engage with them at the same level or meet them at the same level, generally speaking, right?
Yep.
Um, what have you found as game makers has been the key to continuing to get the players coming back and excited for the next event and not just saying, oh, well, I know what this is about and it's just going to be more of the same?
Yeah, that's a really good question because as game makers, you look at an event, and as event coordinators, you look at an event, and you can deliver the same product over and over and over and over and over and over again, year after year. And you can see some producers, that's what they do. They've come up with a really good system. They've come up with a really good way of getting hold of certain AOs or things like that. That is their main draw. Getting players out to places they've never played before. Like that could be a draw for your event series. Then and you lock into your rule set, and you kind of stay in that lane, and you just expect that same experience every single time. And you don't want to rock the boat too much because you don't want people to have a bad time because of something that you've changed. For us, our biggest our biggest attribute, our biggest draw, is the fact that we have the ability to do so many things and deep dive into so many different aspects of gameplay that other straight up milsims can't because they're too confined to just a force on force aspect. They're too confined on a traditional milsim event, which is fine. That's they've been doing it for years, for decades now, and they've had really good success. But as Star Wars, even now as we'll keep saying LARP over and over and over again because we've really leaned into that aspect over, calling it more of a Milsim aspect because it is more of that Milsim West that has delved even further into the LARP aspect because you have people that are in full stormtrooper armor, you have people that are in full complete cosplay, which is just the next tier to everything. When you have specific rules that cater around armor types and different kinds of characters and alien races and things like that, like you have the ability to really dig deep into the games we all wanted to play as kids growing up, and just like we can make this happen. We just have to figure out the right way to implement it, and we have to make it accessible for a lot of people. And that's why our community is so great, is because it's gone past just players. It's more about our community and building the community, because you're going to have first time players, but you're looking at locking them in long term as part of our community, because there's going to be players that show up a few times, but then they're locked into the community because they want to help other people grow and learn
Yeah.
and teach, and whether it's the different facets of cosplay, or it's learning electronic work and figuring out how to make things that don't exist in the real world, like straight up. Like when you think of 2 years ago, like I couldn't solder a circuit board to save my life, but since I started doing this event, like my helmet has, I'm talking to you right now, the microphone is built into my helmet. It is a Bluetooth system. I have hearing amplification. Like my headset is picking up our conversation right now. I've got a fan going in the helmet to clear out all visibility that I have in there. I've got a mini mic output system that kind of gives my helmet that little bit of a ting to it was as you're listening. Those are all things that I couldn't do 2 years ago, and I didn't figure them all out by myself. Right? It was all different facets of the community that got involved in 3D printing, crafting, and really taking not only cosplay, like our Star Wars LARPy cosplay to the next level, but I'm posting stuff in like Mandalorian merch stuff about things I'm doing, and they're like, "Whoa, that's crazy!" Like usually we just put the helmets on, we're fine through the whole, because they're walking around in air conditioned environments. I'm like, I need to be able to see, I need to be able to shoot people, I need to be able to hear who's coming at me, I need to be able to communicate with my team, not only who's next to me, but I need to be able to communicate with the guy that is a half mile away on my radio right now. And those
Hmm.
are all different things you're building and you're learning and you're growing, and then you're fostering the community, because as of right now, I think we have somewhere around 450 in our Discord and 1,200 on our Facebook group, and we're going to keep growing this thing until it's so huge that we get in trouble.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we don't
That's
want to get to that
that's
line, but if you think of how far can we push the event series, and how far can we take it, how many players can we get involved? Can we get thousands of people and rent out certain areas that exist? Can we get enough people to convince Disney that, hey, that hotel room, that hotel system that didn't work for you, what would it take for us to get in there and have it for the weekend and be on a Galactic Star Cruiser, but with Galactic Civil War? You grow this
mhm.
thing big enough, and you grow and foster this thing big enough, because if you look at what Disney has done with Star Wars, but you look at what the community that has done around Star Wars, if you look at the costuming clubs that exist, and like how much like Lucasfilm even like leans into those costuming clubs that exist, and they're like, hey, we need 6 Mandalorian mercs to come be on the show, because we all know you guys have costuming standards, and we need like 6 more Mandalorians to make this work. Or they did that in the Mandalorian season 1, where they're like, hey, we need a bunch of stormtroopers, so get the 501st on the phone and see if
Yeah.
they can get these cosplayers to come out and wear their costume and be in Star Wars for real. And yeah, that's the coolest thing about the Galactic Civil War series, is we have a lot of different facets to get people into the game, whether it's the Battlefront series or the full LARP events, or just participating as just a straight up NPC, or we have the even smaller event series where we're doing like these little local games, and the first one we have is coming up next year, where that's one of our admins who's putting up an even smaller scale event just to get some of his local players involved in the event series.
Yeah, it's interesting that the line that you guys are skirting, because there's this like there's this duality where on the one hand you want to avoid the attention of Mickey Mouse for as long as possible, but on the other hand, like with the right attention and with the right partnership building, right? There's the potential is absolutely massive, and I really take what you say from the costuming aspect in particular, because I have friends of mine who are in 501st, and I'm a maker of costumes myself, and I always think about like I would never take one of my cosplays to the airsoft field because it's not built to get the shit beat out of it, basically, right? It's not meant to be worn. Not that I could trudge around in my Space Marine outfit, but that's beside the point. But like how you build stuff so that it's no longer just a costume piece, but it's a working item that can, sustain BB hits and not break, or that can sustain being worn for multiple hours while you run around and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And like those are really important skills that I like you were saying, you don't just magically develop, right? Like that, if you have a community surrounding you, you can learn those a lot faster, right? And in a way that sets you up for success. So can you talk a little bit about that, like from the Discord standpoint, from the Facebook group, like how much mentoring is there in the community for other players, from a variety of different standpoints?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways you can get involved with the event, right? You could show up with your pristine, full 501st, you know, stormtrooper outfit, and you're like, yeah, you're basically good to go as long as you can move and see in that thing, and you've got the right eye protection underneath it. To like the guy who shows up and he's just wearing, like a full black, BDU outfit or whatever, and he's part of the Imperial forces. The entry point into the event is so wide. Like you could have the guys that are full into cosplay, and you can have the guys that have never even thought about doing cosplay in their life, but they've got more airsoft guns that could arm an entire village if they needed to. You've got both of those players. So you see a lot of like back and forth and give and take, whether it's trading items like, hey, I've got an extra airsoft gun, but I need some help with like armor or a helmet or something, and you see people doing a lot of trading back and forth of goods there. But the other thing is, we're building what exists for our event series, whether it is DT Blasterworks, who's one of Anders, who's one of our admins to the event. He's basically the other main admin for the event series, and he has built his entire side business around airsoft blaster conversions and setting up a business around that. So whether it is like the 11 AEP01s that we have for the event that will be converted into blasters that people can obtain in game, to him having the ability to arm so many players with cool looking blasters for a good price. But then you have so many other makers in our Discord who are making armor. They're making stormtrooper or mud trooper armor for Imperials that they're selling for money. But then they're also having their son wants to be an armor salesman, so he's going to attend the event as a NPC and also sell goods on the field like armor that players will be able to buy with credits as well. So you have players that are not only, building this community in the Discord, but you're also building this kind of live market at the events too, where you have different vendors who have different things. Tyvak, who's been at two of our events, and he was our main droid builder. He's really delved deep into learning how to design, 3D design and make his own droids, and he sells those at the event as part of the rule set. And that's something that you can buy with in-game credits and unlock for your character that way. So we keep building and growing this world. And I'm trying to get one of the guys who came to Bolivar, who he's an amazing artist, and he does all these great paintings. And I want him to come back, and he's a Mandalorian, but I want him to have his own art shop in the middle of town, the Mandalorian art shop, where people can come in and browse his wares and purchase things with credits, and he can earn those credits as a player and as a participant, by selling his artwork at these events. And you just kind of build another layer to the world that exists. But as far as like learning and growing your own skills, like all you got to do is ask. Just join one of those two communities, the Facebook group or the Discord. Jump in and ask the question, hey, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to work on this. Does anyone have any leads? And 9 times out of 10, someone has already kind of gone down that path, or can help lead them, or can help guide them. You might be coming to the event with a new skill that nobody has, that we're all kind of looking for. Whether it's some sort of programming or anything like that you don't think would involve in an airsoft event, but with all the different things that we do, it very much could be part of what we're building, whether it's juggernaut suits or different relays or certain props that exist in game or electronic thermal detonators, because we're trying to see what the world is going to do with the like EG-67. So how do we pivot as a community to try to build something that can be an electronic grenade that works and is reusable and safe, that you don't have to worry about pyro laws slapping down all the time. So that's all the
Mm.
stuff that we're continuing to grow and foster. And we're always surprised when people, make new props or bring new things, because the biggest part of the full LARP events is, we camp on the field. We're setting up, zones with either, Clan War Pan. They all have their own little campsite, and it's on field and it's in game and it's dangerous. But then you also have the rebels and the Imperials who are doing the same. But what other props are they bringing out onto the field for their campsite that just build up that world? And we're seeing new cool things every single day as people are converting their like storage totes and their gun things into Star Warsy looking props, because now you have a duality for your case. Isn't just a case anymore, but now it is a prop you can drop on the field for the weekend and it looks cool. And so now you're almost building an entire set to the Galactic Civil War, and then you're just it's just going, man. It just keeps going.
It's one of the things that I think is so fascinating about what you're describing is the similarity, and maybe I'm dating myself or whatever, but the similarity of the stage crafting and like the kit bashing that used to happen in the Star Wars productions, like how they made the original blasters, which just like, oh, we'll do this and slap this thing on it and now it looks spacey. And also like kit bashing models when I was a kid, or like finding a couple things and just like putting them together and being like, oh, this is a new thing or whatever. The similarities between that and then what you guys are doing now, which is almost continuing this unspoken tradition of Star Wars, which is take one thing and turn it into something else that looks like a completely different thing and looks and fits the universe. And everyone goes, "Oh wow, this is awesome!" As opposed to being like, "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Like that attitude of like,
Yep.
just let's make it work. And I remember one of the stories you told me, like what the first time we chatted about using like cat GPS locators for bounty hunting systems. And I don't know if you've evolved past that. I'm sure that you someone on your teams probably have figured out something more advanced.
Yeah.
But like just looking at one thing and going like this is what it's supposed to be, but it would make an awesome X, right?
Yep.
Is just such an ingrained tradition in the Star Wars. Maybe not now with their like billions and billions of dollar budgets, but certainly back in the day. Yeah, it's really fascinating to me to hear you say all that stuff. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, and without sort of any spoilers or anything, what can players at this event, this upcoming event in a few months, what new things can they expect?
Yeah, that's a great question. The really the thing that I haven't talked a lot about, but it keeps popping in, and then I go off on some other tangent, and I can't circle back around to it. But I'll start off with that. Is I've said multiple times there's three different factions that exist. You have the Imperials, you have the Rebels, and you have the unaffiliated. The coolest thing that I think is going to roll out at this event, and it's going to be good for some players and it's going to be horrible for others, is there is the implementation of that unaffiliated class and essentially or unaffiliated faction, which is really a form your own story choice. Okay, you don't have a boss. You don't have anybody who's going to tell you where you're supposed to be at what time. You don't have a squad leader. You might roll in with you and three of your buddies, and you're playing as mercenaries, right? You're just kind of guns for hire, or you might have a group of smugglers or operatives that are coming in together, and you guys are your own little clique, your own little crew, and you're going to see what you can do in that world. Um, that is the biggest step that we're taking from where we were before, because before we had Clan Vorpan, which was one of the factions, which it still somewhat exists in game, but they're all considered unaffiliated players. The thing is with them is it is still a Mandalorian only group. It is a clan of Mandalorians that kind of have come together and built their story, and will continue to build that story as long as that clan exists. But the faction, the facet there is nothing is guaranteed. when you join as an unaffiliated player. Credits are not guaranteed. Work is not guaranteed. Relationships are not guaranteed. No one is going to hold your hand. No one is going to, point you in the right direction all the time. The biggest thing with the unaffiliated class is it is 100% that choose your own adventure mentality to the game. So those players who join in as unaffiliated need to have the mentality that they have to discover things, they have to ask questions, they have to explore the world to make things happen. Whereas more so Rebels and Imperials, they have that military aspect of, yep, you're going to go here, you're going to go try to do this thing, this squad's going to go try to do this thing, and they're going to have more of a guided path with what they need to do through the event, where the unaffiliated players are really about building relationships with the other NPCs that exist or the NPCs that exist in the game, and what we call is sub factions that exist. Because there might be Huts, there might be Pikes, there might be Clan Vorpan, there might be the Bounty Hunters Guild, the Mercenaries Guild, Assassins Guild. You didn't hear about the Assassins Guild for me. They're not really a thing, but they definitely are. And all different factions that, there's all these different mini NPC groups that exist that all have, their hates for each other, or they go well with each other. The the Bounty Hunter Guild essentially leans into the heat system, which I'll kind of divert into that real quick, that we're rolling out. So in airsoft games and in LARPs, you always have illegal activities that everyone wants to do because they're really cool. You're smuggling spice or drugs, or you're going to go assassinate somebody, or you're going to go do this really fun thing. But in airsoft, there's really no drawback to doing illegal crimes, right? There's no drawback to that kind of gameplay, that kind of mentality. As long as you get away with it, you're fine, kind of deal. We've built this heat system, which you might even think of something kind of like Grand Theft Auto, where as players keep doing illegal activities, they're going to accrue heat. And that heat is something that we visualize through orange bands. So there'll be orange bands that go in the arms, the legs, as you accrue more heat. So this is basically your notoriety or your infamy as you are doing illegal things. And the more heat bands that you start accruing from doing jobs, and essentially you can accrue heat band by completing any illegal activity. So if you're doing a smuggling mission, you come back to the guy and you're like, hey, I dropped the smuggling thing off. They're like, good job. Now you have to roll a chance cube, which is essentially a dice that has 50-50 chance, right? And if it comes up red, that's when you earn your heat band, okay? So you might be someone who doesn't want to accrue a lot of heat, because we'll get into that in a second, what can happen if you have too much heat. But you also, as you keep doing these things, you're going to be building up your own notoriety as a underworld player, and you're going to become more infamous, which is going to unlock different missions and different tasks for you as you complete these missions. And you can obviously visually see if someone has a bunch of heat on them or not. But then the side facet to that, as they get more heat on them, that chimes in this other faction that exists, which is the Bounty Hunters Guild. So as a player who wants to join the Bounty Hunters Guild, you got to dump in some credits into this investment for your Bounty Hunters license. And once you have that, that gives you the ability to track down and hunt players that have heat on them. So as these outworlder or these outlaws are gaining more heat, they become bigger targets for bounty hunters that exist in the game. So now they have a harder time of doing a smuggling mission or doing a certain thing, because they're going to have more eyes looking for them on the field. Bounty hunters themselves can never have any heat on them at all. They have to be basically on the straight and narrow. And that's kind of a little bit different from what the Star Wars lore kind of tells, because they're always supposed to be, slimy, scuzzy, working for criminal underworld guys. But the
no
bounty
incinerations.
No incinerations this time. So the mentality there, though, is we want them to be kind of opposing forces on the map. You might have outlaws that are specifically doing jobs, looking out for bounty hunters and taking shots at them if they know that they're not going to get away with the job they're doing. But now you're drawing in more Imperial activity. Or like, okay, now who's shooting up this part of town? That's going to draw more patrols over to that area to try to figure out, hey, is that a warranted blaster? You have the blaster registration check. And it can lead into so many different things if you're trying to do illegal activities and you're drawing all this attention to yourself. But the bounty hunters specifically are targeting those people that have the heat bands. And once you get so many heat bands on them, it kind of comes back around to what you're talking about is those tracking systems. So we're looking at the little cat trackers that exist, but if you get up to those 4 bands, there's a chance that you can gain one of those trackers on you too. And now the bounty hunters, who also have their own way of leveling up in game, the more experienced bounty hunters have the ability to also possibly gain one of those tracking devices. So now they have a direct line of trying to track down really notorious people that have heat on them. So now you add that other dynamic into the whole play of, okay, I'm wanted, I'm being actively hunted by someone right now that is trying to kill me. I need to try to lay low for a while or drop my heat level down. And there are ways you can do that. You can join the Mercenaries Guild and basically get thrown into an enlistments with the Rebels or the Imperials for a given time, and then that takes away your heat. The other thing is that bounty hunter can bring you in. So I'll say that player with a bunch of heat on them is roaming around. They can get gunned down by a bounty hunter, and as long as the rank levels are good, that bounty hunter can bring in that person who has heat to the Bounty Hunters Guild, and then the person who gets brought in that has the heat on them has to pay credits. Okay, so they have the ability to lose credits by being brought in if they have heat on them. So that is the big dynamic there of doing illegal jobs and taking the risk and possibly being hunted and possibly losing credits if you end up getting found out and brought in. And that is just another layer, another dynamic layer that goes into the whole open world aspect of the game. Because not only do you have the Imperials and the Rebels trying to kill each other, you have the bounty hunters, the outlaws kind of working against each other at all times, and then you've got, the guys who are straight up on the up and up who are just trying to make some credits by helping out Jawas find a Sugu or a furry egg or whatever it is they're looking for. So there's so many different facets to the event, and really any player can have an amazing time out there as long as they are at least a tiny bit familiar with Star Wars. Otherwise, they're going to have no idea what's going on. But really, just watch one of the movies and you're going to be fine. That's all that we ask is just come with a little bit of knowledge of Star Wars. But even if you don't, I'm sure there's some person out there who could think that this event is really fun, even though they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, I suspect that if someone ever went to one of your events not knowing anything about Star Wars, they wouldn't be long learning and then going home and I need to watch everything because next time I'm going, I'm not. Yeah, so I can see that. And it certainly seems like this unaffiliated role that you've talked about is giving players an opportunity to be entrepreneurial, I guess, in a different way than perhaps they would be, or they might have been previously. Like if they were affiliated with the Empire or the Rebels, maybe that's exactly what they were looking for, is it's okay, how do I just do my own thing a little bit more? And if you're already the kind of person who is familiar with LARPing and understands how to interact with the world, because I could see this role being very challenging for someone who doesn't know a whole lot about LARPing in general, understanding some of the concepts of what can I do or how do I behave just in general. I can see that being challenging. But if you know that stuff and you're okay, no, I want to go out there and tell my story, this is the perfect, it's the sandbox within the sandbox, so to speak, right?
Yep.
So that sounds like a nice new addition for your returning players especially.
I mean, we're always looking at new places to take our event series. So if you're someone who is in close contact with our field, or you're a field owner who thinks that the event series is really cool, I highly recommend you join, one of our groups, or hit me up on Facebook. I'm 6mm Mandalorian, and just talk it through and see how we can bring Galactic Civil War to a, place a lot closer, a lot less far away.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I mean, I'm always so stoked to talk to you about these events. It's so much fun. I just love, we were talking just privately before the show. I'd love to come down to one of these events. Next year is not going to be my year, but because I mean I've only got one trip in me to the US, and it's going to be to Iron Horse. But it's the kind of thing that, as you were mentioning too, like the more this goes on, the better and better it gets in terms of content and in terms of mechanics and stuff. So I'm so thrilled to see how this year goes. I'm sure we'll be talking before the end of the year once your event wraps. But thanks so much for being on. Thanks so much for having the conversation with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And that's all we have for you this week, guys. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to talk to Chris, you can join our Discord. You can join his Discord for Galactic Civil War, as well as a Facebook group. The links are all going to be in the description. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.